You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Did you have something?
No.
Okay. Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan. I'm here with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah. So we were talking before that there have been a couple of times where I've started the taping while you were musing on one or another subject.
I have a tendency to muse randomly,
and
yes. And occasionally it leaks.
And so now I like try and do that. I like try and because I didn't clip those off. I just let them kind of roll into the introduction. So now I kind of try and do it, but I think you've kind of figured it out, and so you are more careful now. I don't know if that's true or not.
The older I get, the less random I try to be, or at least the less apprehension of my randomness I try to experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you are listening to us and you like the show, we are asking people to tell a couple of friends about Psych with Mike. If you are listening to us on I-10, the positive voice of the desert, please let us know. Go to psychwithmike.com and leave us a message and tell us that you're listening and what you think about the show and if there's anything that you would like us to discuss. So we are, happy that people are finding the show to be worthwhile. We're happy that we're expanding, that we're now syndicated. We're happy that people are letting us know that they enjoy being on the show. We've had, I have been amazed that everybody that we have had on the show has been so incredibly positive about the show and about wanting to continue to be contributors. So we've never had anybody come on the show and say, okay, thank you for that, and never heard from them again.
Well, that's in part because the reason you have me on the show. I am the
You're the glue.
Schmoozing quality, yeah.
You're the glue that holds the whole thing together.
That's right.
I mean, I don't know what would happen if it weren't for you being here.
The numbers would go down.
As the adhesive. Yeah. It would be unthinkable.
Absolutely. I don't even think about it myself.
And as a matter of fact, when I think about it, I find myself developing a tremendous amount of anxiety over it.
Will you wake up in the middle of the night and think about what if Brett doesn't do the show anymore?
Mm-hmm.
I can understand why you would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then when I talk about that with my therapist, they have often said, well, maybe we should do some exposure therapy for that.
When I talk about it with my therapist, she says, well, maybe he should be feeling that anxiety.
So
what do you mean by exposure therapy?
Well, I'm glad you asked that.
You set me up. I had to ask.
So exposure therapy is
that like the old guy in the raincoat walking down the street?
Well, if it is, then that's a different kind of exposure therapy than I was trained to do.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah. But actually, I was never trained to do exposure therapy because I'm old enough that when I was in school, they actually called it systematic desensitization.
I was going to say, when you were in school, we called it systematic. You were taught about systematic desensitization because I taught you about it.
Yeah.
But the concept is that someone who has an extreme emotional reaction, negative reaction to something, and we sometimes call those phobias, their system shuts down. Their system gets out of control, and they find that to be an incredibly unpleasant experience, which may block them from doing things that are safe, being safe in a moment, and from being able to process what's going on in a healthy and helpful way. It's very, very limiting and very damaging. You feel the anxiety about it, the fear, the panic, your body runs crazy, all of the biochemical stuff that happens inside you floods, and you can't impose rational control over it and back up. So if you have a phobia about snakes or dead bodies or spiders, you need to have a way to minimize the intensity of your reaction. I used to have a phobia about dead bodies, and I used to have one about snakes, and I
did not know the dead bodies.
Found out later they were related. But I had,
Do you want to tell that story?
when I was maybe 4 years old, my aunt took me on a train ride to Shreveport, Louisiana, to a funeral for somebody I didn't know. And went with her on this trip. I don't know why she took me. She got handed me and said, "Here, take him." But I remember being in this funeral, which I'd never been to one before that I remember or knew about. And all these people were crying and moaning and carrying on. And there was a casket in the front of the room. And you could see like a nose peeking up out of the casket from the viewpoint that I had. And at the end of whatever the service was, people got up in a line and filed past the body in the casket. And my aunt took me. She was carrying me. We went up to the casket, and I don't know that I ever had seen a dead body before that. But she insisted that I kiss this guy and put me down in the casket so that I could kiss him. And I just had an extreme fear of that for many, many years and couldn't go to funerals. I remember one time I was teaching junior high school, and one of the students in my class fell through the ice skating on a pond, drowned.
Wow.
And my partner, teaching partner, and I went to the funeral home, and I couldn't go in. I had a panic attack. I'm sitting in the car, and I'm thinking, okay, you're the teacher, you're the grown-up, you love this kid, his family loves him, you need to go in and make contact. And I couldn't go. So my partner went in, and he told the family, Mr. Newcomb's out in the parking lot, but he's so torn up he can't come in. And the mom said, well, "We're not happy about being here either." Which, who knows why she said that. But it just wasn't a deftly done thing.
But people are
I understand
under
that.
duress.
I know I'm more focused on that. Caused me then to say I need to deal with this because these circumstances are not tolerable. I need to be able to go to a funeral. I need to be able to help people who need my help. And I get in my own way when I have this phobic reaction. And I feel panic attacks. I remember going to my grandfather's funeral, and I sat at the very back of the room and stared at the line on the ceiling where the wall met the ceiling and never looked at the casket, paid attention to the service. I was trying to control my breathing. I was having panic breathing. It just was horrible. And I was invited to go up and say goodbye to my grandfather. I couldn't do it. Wouldn't do it, and so I worked on that, and that's what one of the ways to work on that is what you call systematic desensitization, or what now is called in vitro therapy, or what's this word? Exposure. Exposure therapy. New term, same concept. A severe way. If you have a phobia about spiders, just throw a spider in your lap. And you'll either die or get better. It'll go away because your system will override the panic and say, you're not dying, you have to move, you have to get out of here, get rid of the spider, with the snake, whatever it happens to be. I personally don't like that kind of therapy.
So in the old way, under systematic desensitization, that kind of thing was called flooding. So you would overwhelm a person's system with stimulation, and then afterwards say to that person, "See, you made it through this. This isn't life-threatening. It's all okay." And the person would say, "F you. That was horrible. Why did you do that to me?" But that was one way in which people talked about systematic desensitization, was through this idea of flooding, where you just would overwhelm the person with the stimulation.
Well, that's why they call it in vivo. Systematic desensitization is you sit in the room and you say, I want you to imagine a snake on the floor. And you start to hyperventilate and you start to feel panic, and then you stop it. And then you teach them, imagine the snake a foot closer. Just stay with this as long as you can stay with it, break when you need to break. And it's all imaginary. So then you take a picture of a book, and here's a picture of a snake. Can you hold it? Can you look at it? Can you control your breathing? Can you? And eventually, the anxiety attack and the panic attack starts to diminish in intensity, and people get more able to be around. I mean, I was teaching high school psychology years ago, and I was talking about phobias in my class and told them that I had a phobia of snakes. The very next day,
Somebody brought a snake.
one of my students opened my classroom door and had this python draped around her shoulders. And she said, "Is this okay?" You know, I mean, she wanted to see me have a meltdown and poop my pants and do whatever.
Yeah.
A panic reaction. And I asked if everybody felt okay, and class was like, "Yeah, we won't see the snake." You know, I said, "Okay, then I can tolerate this if you want to come in and let people look at your snake and don't touch it, none of the kids. But if you want to do this, you come in the room." And I was working on controlling my breathing and being in the room and being present in my body and all that kind of stuff. And she walked over close to me, and she said, "Would you like to touch the snake?"
And you said no.
I said I would like to,
Oh.
but I couldn't. My body
Yeah.
locked up.
Ugh.
I didn't have a decomposition experience, but my body wouldn't move. My hand wouldn't reach for that snake. And I felt my breathing get tighter, and I said, "Okay, you need to leave now." And so she left. So I was grateful that I did not lose my composure in front of my class, which was entirely possible. I could have had a panic reaction. So I had, by that time, made some progress. And I remember, talking about systematic desensitization, I remember my wife and I bought our first house, and my dog was in the backyard barking and carrying on, and he had a snake trapped. And I went out and was able to kneel down next to the snake and touch the snake and pick it up and put it in the ditch behind the house. First time I can ever remember voluntarily touching a snake. But I had progressed from the point of just a panic attack to the point of being able to touch one in a controlled environment where I felt really safe, not surprised, not blindsided. And it was because of my efforts to do systematic desensitization and gradually increase my tolerance for the stimuli that was panic-based stimuli.
So we used to talk about this systematic desensitization practice, and when I was going through school, it was very much focused on the idea of phobias, and that was really the only application of systematic desensitization. So nowadays, exposure therapy is a broader kind of approach that still deals with phobias and panic disorders, but also deals with social anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress, obsessive compulsive disorders, and generalized anxiety. So systematic desensitization wasn't really good at dealing with this kind of generalized anxiety disorder. So the idea of these exposure therapies are supposed to be better. Now, I'm not saying that they're not, but it's really a way of generalizing this application to a less intense, less severe kind of pathology.
But gradually increase the intensity or find the break point where you no longer experience.
Well, so with the exposure therapy, what's different about that than what we used to call systematic desensitization is that it's now, really more in the realm of the cognitive behavior therapy, and really is, for the most part, application is more like worksheet based. And I'll put up a worksheet, an example of a worksheet on the website when I post the stuff for the show notes. But basically with the exposure therapy, you identify some fear
Trigger.
thing. So, if you say, let's say that it's even something that's, more generalized, like a fear of viruses, which would be something that could be a phobia, but doesn't necessarily have to be.
Well, my understanding of phobias is that if you have a phobia, you typically have four. And that they are displacement experiences, that you have something that you can't face directly causing you anxiety, and so you displace it onto something that more people would readily accept. And many people can accept a phobia of spiders or snakes and not look down on you or criticize you and say, "Oh, you weakling, you," because hell, everybody's afraid of snakes.
Right.
Well, not everybody is, but that's what people have a tendency to say. But if you instead said, "I'm afraid my parents don't love me," or "I'm afraid my wife won't love me," and people would be like, "Well, you're crazy," So it's more acceptable to identify a displaced target source, and then react to that. And so then you can do that.
Right. And you and I, who are very, very psychodynamic, would both agree that that is what we would conceptualize as the motivational forces that are associated with these things. A straight cognitive behavioral therapist, we might have trouble selling them.
Yeah, because they go
that.
back to the worksheet thing. Well,
Yeah.
let's just do 5 worksheets and it'll be better because you
But-
cognitively reprocess the interpretation.
Right. And that's the point. That's what they try and do, is to reprocess the cognitive
and
input.
it works. What we do in psychology is we just change the names every so often. When people catch on, we come out with a new label. And we say, oh, well, let's call it systematic desensitization. Oh, well, let's call it in vitro desensitization. Oh, well, let's call it exposure therapy.
Right.
And let's do it cognitively.
So if we think about the idea of the being afraid of germs, you know, and let's say it's not during a pandemic.
Yeah, like the president.
And so, okay, so I'm not going to.
You're not going to go?
No.
All right.
But you know that when my son was in your wife's class, so that was in 3rd grade, he was experiencing a lot of generalized anxiety. And so one of the things that we know is that with a generalized anxiety disorder, clearly the motivation of that is from some deeper rooted cause, but it gets hung up on things that you can actually try and control. So for
Right,
him,
so you try to identify the symptom and take that symptom away. Well, then they find another symptom.
yeah,
So if I'm a hand washer and I wash my hands 1,000 times a
And
day,
that was what
and
he did.
You say, well, let's stop hand washing. So you do that. Then they find something else to do, like biting their fingernails,
and exactly.
or eating their hair. It just is a roll over to the. So you have to address the underlying issue.
And so he would, in your wife's class, he would wash his hands until he actually had his wrists were red and inflamed and chafed. And they worked all that year on him reducing that behavior, and he really got much better with that. But even still to this day, his anxiety still gets hung up on things, and it really is.
We try to find a social adaptation. I remember having a client years ago, junior high boy, who had OCD to a severe level. He had a ritual that he had to go through before he could leave the house in the morning. And if anybody interrupted the ritual, or if he missed,
He'd have to start over. Yeah.
well, he'd have to start over 3, 4, 5, 10 times before he could ever leave the door.
Yeah.
So they brought him to me, and we tried to work on those things. And one of the things that we were able to do is help him learn how to focus it and manage it. And he grew up and found a career that was ideally tailor-made for his OCD impulses. And he became a Secret Service agent on the personal detail of President George Bush. And I used to see him run alongside the Cadillac when Bush was traveling somewhere. There'd be my former student grown up doing a job of value and reward that maximized the benefit that he could get from his OCD impulses.
Yeah, and that's lucky because not everybody
Yes,
finds
absolutely.
finds
Hello.
that job.
Yeah.
But so in the exposure therapy,
It's like a joke about, doctor, my husband thinks he's a chicken.
Yeah.
Well, we can fix that. No, don't do that. We need the eggs.
we need the eggs.
Yeah, exactly.
so we identify what is the stimulus. So I'm afraid of germs. Then you come up with 3 statements. Then this is a generalized rule,
Right.
and everybody may practice this differently.
Yeah, don't practice this at home.
3 statements that you might tell yourself about that. Well, if there are germs on my hands, then I might get sick. If I get sick, then I might, end up in the hospital. If I end up in the hospital, I might actually die.
So right now we're giving that message about the coronavirus.
Right.
Wash your hands 1,000,000 times a
Yeah.
day and don't touch your face.
Right.
Or else you'll die and everybody you know will die.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty direct feed into those obsessions.
Right, and that's why I'm saying let's assume that this wasn't a time of pandemic.
Okay.
Because then if you get messages from society that actually reinforces that message,
Hello.
well then you're being validated, so that refutes the whole process. But then you would go in and try and dispute that. So you're writing this stuff down. So you have the individual write this stuff down. I'm afraid of germs. These are the 3 statements that I might tell myself about being afraid of germs. And then you dispute those things. Well, what is the probability that you would end up dying?
Cognitively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the probability that you might end up in the hospital? What is the probability that you might end up sick?
So does that make it go underground?
Well, so then you try and develop a new thought, a new cognitive
Oh,
structure.
so this is all Marxism. This is thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Yes.
And we move the
Yes.
progression of history along. Dialectical materialism.
Those are big words
Yeah.
that may or may not have meaning for
Oh, when
people.
you use those words in a technical sense, it's okay. But when I use them, I'm interrupting your thought flow.
No.
Sorry.
You've told me 1,000 times people don't want to hear
Well,
you.
they don't from you.
But I don't disagree with your premise. No.
Yeah.
So I mean, nothing is new under the sun. It's just all rebranding and repackaging, just as you've said before. But this is how the exposure therapy is worked through the cognitive behavioral process. And the idea is that you come up with a new cognitive message, and then you try and practice that message.
Train yourself to hear it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then when you get in
In
that
the presence
situation,
of the stimuli.
exactly.
So when I see a snake, I hear my new special messages about snakes instead of my original panic message. Yeah.
And you might also
So now I
couple
touch a
that
snake.
with deep muscle relaxation, DMR,
Yeah.
or with breathing exercises, and like you were trying to
It
do
depends on how the panic
in the
manifests.
classroom.
Yeah.
Well, you were trying to watch your breathing to maintain that, so that you didn't get to a point where it felt unmanageable.
And my bowels.
Yeah. And so then you would couple that, okay, try and be mindful of your breathing while you're telling yourself this new message. And you might have to actually practice that for a long time before that becomes automatic. But the idea would be that then the new message would supplant the old message and become the new way in which you would be able to think
That
about
is
the
the goal,
stimuli.
to internalize
Yeah.
the new message and put it in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've always said that works in inverse proportion to the intensity of the stimulus, meaning that the more intense the stimulus, the less good that this works.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
To me.
So if you
Well,
are
just like somebody with OCD. If you have this incredible need to organize and arrange things,
Right.
and somebody comes in and turns your picture on the wall slanted or crooked, or moves your coffee cup from where you normally put it to somewhere else, does that help you say, I'm overreacting, I know what's going on, and that's helpful, or does that cause you to explode with anxiety?
And one of the most intense cases that I worked on with exposure therapy was a young man who had OCD really, really bad, and also had Tourette's. And his OCD was a form of helping him deal with the Tourette's. And one of the things that he would do is when he would get anxious, he'd have to open all of the cabinets in the kitchen. And they had to stay open. And if anybody touched any of the cabinets, then he would literally lose it.
So would you take all the cabinet doors off?
No. So what we did was we worked on this with through the exposure therapy process, and we talked about what would happen if the cabinet doors weren't open, and eventually what we did was we worked through to a process
Close
where
one door, close two doors, close three doors?
well, so at first what we did was we would only open them halfway.
Okay.
And
yeah.
then
Yeah, it's the same thing, concept.
Yeah,
Exactly.
And then we got to a point where yes, he could very comfortably, if he would start to get anxious, only open one door, which for his parents was a godsend. Because trying to navigate through their kitchen with all the cabinet doors open was impossible.
He has power over it, and he can choose to allow it to take over him or to fight it back. And you teach him the skills for how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that is so important. And I don't know if everybody teaches the exposure therapy or uses the exposure therapy in that way. But for me, the idea of self-empowerment is central to that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
Either you're in control of the stimuli and the
or the
response
stimuli
to
is in
or
control
it's in
you.
control of you.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. So if you guys want to, you can go to psychwithmike.com and you can find additional episodes there. You can go on the YouTubes and you can find Psych with Mike, and you can subscribe and like one of the videos. You can go on iTunes and you can subscribe and leave us a comment. We would love any of those things. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you have any comments about that, you can always get us through psychwithmike.com. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.